What if I told you that a violent shooting in Houston did not begin with money, fame, or gang rivalry, but with something far more personal? A relationship dispute. A woman caught in the middle. And a chain of decisions that escalated so quickly that multiple people ended up in critical condition. Now let me ask you something right from the start. How often do we underestimate the consequences of pride? And when does personal ego stop being personal and start becoming dangerous for everyone around it? Because what unfolded in Houston, allegedly involving Jay Prince Jr., the son of one of hip-hop's most influential and controversial figures, is not just another headline. It is a case study in how fast influence, emotion, and street reputation can collide with devastating results. And by the end of this story, you may find yourself asking a very uncomfortable question. Was any of this really worth it? The weight of a legacy. To understand how this situation escalated, we need to understand the name at the center of it. Jay Prince Jr. was not just another figure in the music industry. He is the son of James Prince, the founder of Rap-A-Lot Records, a label deeply tied to Houston's hip-hop history. Over the years, that name became associated with power, influence, and a reputation that extended far beyond music. But here is the deeper question. What happens when someone grows up beneath a powerful legacy and still feels the need to prove himself on his own terms? Is it ever really easy to separate who you are from the shadow your family name casts? Jay Prince Jr. eventually built his own imprint, Mob Ties, and positioned himself as a businessman, connector, and figure with his own circle of artists and associates. To supporters, that signaled ambition and organization. To critics, it raised questions about control, influence, and the complicated culture surrounding Houston's entertainment world. But one thing is undeniable. His name carried weight. And when a name carries weight, every move gets magnified. Every gesture gets analyzed. Every conflict becomes bigger than the people directly involved. That is the danger of living where image and reputation can become currency. The other side of the story. A Detroit artist. On the other side of this unfolding situation is a rapper known as Allstar Jr., a figure from Detroit's East Side whose real name is Jeremy Ford. And that brings up another important question. How many people truly understand what it takes to survive and build a name in a city like Detroit's rap scene? Allstar Jr. was not portrayed as some outsider unfamiliar with hardship. He had already lived through the kind of experiences that harden a person. He built his reputation through years of grinding, working with other Detroit artists, and pushing forward despite personal setbacks that could have ended his career long before it really began. According to the story surrounding him, he had endured incarceration and even survived a near-fatal shooting in 2021 that left him with severe injuries. Imagine what that does to a person. Imagine waking up after that and still deciding to keep going. Would that make someone more cautious? More defiant? More determined not to be pushed around? That background matters, because when someone who has already survived extreme violence enters a volatile situation, the energy changes. The temperature changes. The room changes. And that is exactly why this conflict was never going to remain simple. The relationship that changed everything. At the center of the conflict was not a business deal or a professional disagreement. It was personal. Reports circulating online suggested that Jay Prince Jr. became involved with a woman connected to Allstar Jr., the mother of his child. That detail alone instantly raises the stakes. Because when a relationship crosses into public view, it is no longer only about feelings. It becomes about embarrassment, loyalty, anger, and the fear of being disrespected in front of other people. What makes this situation more volatile is the way it allegedly unfolded publicly. Instead of staying private, social media activity reportedly made the situation visible. Videos and posts began circulating that made the relationship appear open and unmistakable. That is where modern conflict becomes different from older conflict. Nothing stays hidden anymore. Nothing stays local. And once the internet gets involved, every hurt feeling gains an audience. So ask yourself, when private matters become public entertainment, what usually happens next? Do they calm down? Or do they spiral? In this case, the answer seems painfully clear. A pattern of escalation. Those familiar with Jay Prince Jr.'s public history point to earlier incidents where conflicts involving women also led to confrontations with other public figures. One example frequently discussed online involved artist Trey Songz, where personal issues again became public and physical tension followed. Now, whether people see these as isolated events or part of a larger pattern depends on how they interpret the broader picture. But in public life, patterns matter. Reputations are built not only on what is proven, but also on what people believe they are seeing. And that is the dangerous part. Because once a pattern becomes part of the story, every new incident gets viewed through that lens. People stop asking, "What happened?" and start asking, "Is this who he is?" That kind of perception can intensify a situation before anyone even enters the room. So by the time the Houston incident came into focus, there was already tension in the air. Not just because of what allegedly happened that day, but because of everything people believed they already knew. The Houston check-in debate. Before the shooting, there has long been discussion in hip-hop culture about the idea of checking in when artists visit certain cities, especially Houston. Some describe it as a way of showing respect or coordinating with local influential figures. Others see it as a pressure system, a kind of unofficial gatekeeping that can blur the line between hospitality and control. Even Jay Prince Sr. has publicly denied that he or his circle enforce some kind of coercive check-in requirement, arguing that the claims are exaggerated or misunderstood. Still, perception is powerful. And in a city where reputation matters, people often move with caution, whether the caution is based on reality, rumor, or fear of misunderstanding. So what happens when someone from out of town enters that environment already carrying personal tension? What happens when a romantic dispute meets a city's reputation for power, influence, and street politics? That is where the story shifts from messy to dangerous. Because in moments like that, every word sounds sharper. Every stare feels heavier. Every decision carries consequences that nobody can reverse once the first move is made. When emotions become action. In stories like this, there is always a turning point. A moment where emotion stops being private and starts shaping behavior. A moment where someone decides they have been disrespected too much, ignored too long, or challenged in a way they are no longer willing to accept. And in a situation involving strong personalities, a public relationship dispute, and an already charged atmosphere, that turning point can come fast. How fast is too fast? Fast enough that people do not realize the danger until shots have already been fired. Fast enough that what began as a personal grievance turns into a medical emergency. Fast enough that the people standing nearby, even those who never wanted any part of it, suddenly find themselves in the blast radius of somebody else's anger. That is the tragic part. Violence rarely stays contained to the people who think they are the main characters. It spreads. It lands on bystanders. It creates trauma that outlives the moment itself. And once that happens, the story is no longer about pride. It is about survival. The aftermath and the questions people cannot ignore. When an incident like this enters the public conversation, the immediate reaction is usually confusion followed by speculation. People want to know who started it. Who knew what? Who was present? Who said what? Who escalated first? But beneath all those questions is a larger one. Why do so many conflicts in the public keep ending this way? Why does ego keep getting treated like a badge of honor until someone gets seriously hurt? Why does influence sometimes create the illusion that consequences can be controlled, when in reality they almost never can? That is what makes this Houston story so unsettling. It is not only the alleged events themselves, but what they represent. A personal dispute became a public spectacle. A relationship issue became a violent incident. And a group of people found themselves caught inside a chain reaction that may have been avoidable at nearly every step. That is what makes the story linger. Not just the drama, but the question of whether the outcome was preventable if different choices had been made earlier. What this story really reveals. At its core, this is not simply a story about a rapper, a woman, or a shooting. It is a story about the way modern conflict grows when reputation, social media, local power, and personal pride all mix together in the same space. It shows how quickly a private decision can become a public controversy. It shows how easily a city's reputation can shape how people move inside it. And it shows how, in the world of entertainment and street culture, people sometimes act as if being feared is the same thing as being respected. But is it? Is fear really respect? Is power really control? And when the smoke clears, what remains? In stories like this, the answers are rarely clean, and they are almost never painless. Because when conflict reaches a certain point, it stops belonging to the people at the center of it. It spreads. It spreads into families who never asked to be involved. It spreads into children who may never fully understand why their lives suddenly changed. It spreads into careers built over years, sometimes erased in a single night of bad decisions. And it spreads into the public, watching from a distance, forced to decide whether they are witnessing entertainment or a warning. And maybe that is the real question underneath all of this. Are we watching drama? Or are we watching consequences unfold in real time? Because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. The moment pride becomes more important than peace, everything around it becomes vulnerable. And in Houston, in an incident allegedly involving figures such as J. Prince Jr. and Allstar Jr., that vulnerability reportedly turned into something far more serious than anyone expected. So ask yourself one question before we go deeper. How many tragedies begin with something as small as a personal disagreement, and end with people wishing they had simply walked away? The night everything collided. April 9, 2026, began like an ordinary night in Houston. A city known for its music culture, its nightlife, and its deeply intertwined networks of business, influence, and reputation. But beneath the surface, tensions were already moving. According to circulating reports and online accounts, multiple individuals connected to an ongoing dispute found themselves at the same location that night, a restaurant identified as Confessions. And here's where things shift. Because physical space changes everything. Online tension is one thing. Messages, posts, indirect threats, and public exchanges exist in a world where time allows reflection. But what happens when those same individuals end up sharing the same air, the same lights, the same exits, the same crowded room? What happens when avoidance is no longer an option? In situations like this, proximity becomes pressure. And pressure, if it has nowhere to go, eventually breaks something. So the question becomes, was this night inevitable or avoidable? The building tension inside the venue. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere reportedly began to shift almost imperceptibly at first. Not chaos. Not violence. Just awareness. That subtle human instinct when someone recognizes another presence in the room and suddenly becomes more alert, more guarded, more aware of movement, tone, and distance. Witness-style accounts suggest that conversations slowed. Groups adjusted positions. Friends became barriers. Barriers became buffers. And still, nothing had happened. Because this is often how escalation begins. Not with action, but with recognition. At what point does awareness turn into tension? And at what point does tension become confrontation? Those questions don't have easy answers. But they define everything that follows. The altercation begins. According to widely circulated accounts, the situation eventually escalated inside the venue into a physical confrontation involving multiple individuals. Reports suggest that J. Prince Jr. became physically involved in an altercation with Allstar Jr., with claims indicating a restraint or hold was applied during the struggle. At the same time, other individuals allegedly moved into the confrontation, surrounding the situation and intensifying what was already a rapidly escalating moment. Among those reportedly present was NBA Ben 10, an affiliate associated with NBA YoungBoy's broader circle. And when multiple people enter a single conflict at once, something almost always happens. Control disappears. Judgment becomes fragmented. And the situation stops being about intent and starts being about reaction. So ask yourself, in a crowded, high-pressure moment, how many people are truly thinking clearly? And how many are simply reacting to survive the next second? The moment everything shifted. Then, according to reports, the situation took a far more dangerous turn. During the physical struggle, Allstar Jr. allegedly managed to access a firearm. And in that instant, everything changed. Because physical confrontations have limits. They have bodies, space, and endurance. But when a weapon enters the equation, the entire structure of reality collapses into something unpredictable. Reports indicate that gunfire erupted inside the restaurant. And in a space designed for conversation, music, and dining, panic replaced everything. People didn't argue. They didn't negotiate. They ran. Tables overturned. Chairs were pushed aside. Glasses shattered. The normal rhythm of a public place was replaced by survival instinct. And in moments like that, time behaves differently. Seconds feel like minutes. Sound becomes disjointed. And every movement feels like it could be the difference between safety and catastrophe. 2 individuals were reportedly struck during the incident. NBA Ben 10 was reported to have suffered multiple gunshot wounds to his upper body, while another individual sustained injuries to extremities. Emergency responders arrived and transported the injured to medical facilities in critical condition. So here is the question that refuses to leave. How does something that begins as a personal disagreement escalate into gunfire inside a public restaurant? What breaks first, the relationship or restraint? Aftermath and exiting the scene. In the aftermath of the chaos, reports suggest that Allstar Jr. left the scene independently. This detail has fueled significant online discussion, especially given the sequence of events described by witnesses and circulating narratives. But here is where reality becomes complicated. Because public perception moves fast. Legal processes do not. Investigations take time, evidence takes time, and official conclusions take even longer. So in the gap between what people believe happened and what can be proven, entire narratives begin to form. And once those narratives form, they are difficult to undo. So another question emerges. Are people reacting to facts, or to fragments of a story they've only partially seen? The NBA young boy connection and expanding ripple effects. The reported involvement of NBA Ben 10 added another layer of attention to the situation. Because in modern music culture, individual incidents rarely stay isolated. They echo. They connect to larger networks of artists, affiliates, reputations, and long-standing tensions that already exist beneath the surface. And when someone connected to a major musical ecosystem becomes involved in a violent incident, the story stops being local. It becomes amplified, which leads to another uncomfortable question. When individual conflicts intersect with larger cultural networks, does accountability become clearer or more complicated? History suggests the answer is rarely simple. Business, power, and public scrutiny. Beyond the immediate violence, there are broader implications that extend into business and reputation. J. Prince Jr.'s association with mob ties, a brand connected to business ventures and music industry influence, has placed added scrutiny on the situation. Whenever incidents like this occur, they don't just affect individuals, they affect perception. And perception, in industries built on reputation, is currency. Even without formal conclusions, public attention often shifts quickly toward questions of stability, leadership, and internal dynamics. Are these isolated incidents, or signs of deeper structural tension? And once again, the public is left interpreting shadows rather than clarity. The bigger cultural conversation. This incident also reopens a much larger discussion within hip-hop and urban culture. What does respect mean in a world where reputation travels faster than people? How does influence operate when it exists both online and offline? And perhaps most importantly, when does reputation stop protecting people and start putting them at greater risk? These questions don't belong to one city. They don't belong to one group. They reflect a broader system where identity, pride, and perception constantly collide. And collisions, by nature, create damage. Where things stand. At this stage, public information remains incomplete. Reports indicate that NBA Ben 10 remains in critical condition but is expected to survive. Allstar Jr. remains under public scrutiny as investigations continue. No formal public legal conclusions have been confirmed regarding the full sequence of responsibility or involvement. And as with many incidents of this nature, the truth is still unfolding in layers. But one fact is already clear. The consequences are real. And they are ongoing. Final reflection. When you strip away names, affiliations, and online narratives, what remains is a very simple reality. People were injured. Lives were disrupted. And an entire community is now left processing what happened inside a single night that escalated far beyond anyone's control. And so we return to the original question, not as speculation, but as reflection. When personal conflict is allowed to escalate unchecked, who ultimately pays the price? The individuals directly involved? Or everyone caught in the ripple effect that follows? Because in stories like this, the most dangerous moment is not always the first argument. Sometimes, It is the moment everyone believes it can still be controlled. And by the time reality proves otherwise, it is already too late.